Hi, my name is Ethan Foster, and I'm an instructor here at Bentley's Drum Shop in Fresno, California. My lesson today is going to be part one of a two-part mini-series, I suppose. And today's lesson is going to be all about right-hand ostinato variations. I'm going to be using the funky primer for the majority of today's lesson, but it's only to reference a couple things. If you don't have the book, it's not going to have any bearing on your ability to benefit from this lesson, and I hope you enjoy. So, like I said, our lesson today is going to be on ostinatos. And ostinato is just a fancy musical word for a repeated rhythmic idea. Because the idea of an ostinato is so simple, it can manifest as a quarter note, it could be eighth notes, it could be a more complex rhythm like one and a. It could be any grouping of notes. As long as the idea repeats, it's an ostinato. Usually one of the first ostinatos that a drum set player is going to learn is simply going to be eighth notes on the hi-hat, and that's how it's written for the majority of the funky primer in the book. And that would be counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But I want to expand that. I want to give us some more options, like at the very back of the book. So if you turn to the last page of the funky primer, you're going to notice that in addition to some really hard material between the bass drum and the snare drum, Charles Dowd, the author, also includes some stuff on the ride cymbal where it's a changing rhythm, and the left foot is going to be involved as well. I'm saving left foot material and left foot ostinato variations for tomorrow's lesson in part 2, but today we're going to be working on right hand ostinato variations and using that on top of the other material in the funky primer. I don't think any drummer has to wait until they get to the back of the book to start using these very common ideas on how we're keeping time with the right hand, either on the ride cymbal, the hi-hat, it could be on the floor tom, it could be on anything. I just want to free up our right hand to be able to play more complex rhythms, which is going to give us a little bit more depth, complexity, and nuance in the beats and the grooves that we're able to create. So here's a first example. I'm going to be using beat number 2 in the funky primer, which sounds just like this. This is as written, beat number 2, in section 3A of the funky primer. It's the money beat, as a lot of the instructors are going to be referring to it, and it sounds like this: 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Now, we have a total of 16 different possible rhythmic combinations for one beat of 16th notes. I'm going to have in the video here all of the written rhythms for you to refer to. We're going to be using all of these 16 combinations on top of the beats in the funky primer. A lot of these are going to be more common in actual practice and performance for a drummer than some of the other ones, but I think it's valuable and useful to be able to have some material that you're always going to be able to practice, material that's going to challenge you, and stuff that will hopefully inspire some really awesome new creative ideas on the beats that you're able to make even outside of the book. So here's how I break it down. The first subgrouping of these 16 possible rhythmic combinations is 0 notes. I think it makes sense to build these ostinatos based on how many notes during the beat we're going to be playing. How many consecutive groupings of 16th notes are present in the beat at any given time. So 0 is the first one I like to start with. Let's just take the right hand out and see if we can do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you haven't done so already, you can do this with every single beat in the book, and all of a sudden, you've doubled the total number of beats that the funky primer has available to any drummer. That's pretty cool. Next, we're going to be working with single notes within the 16th note grid. So any possible 16th note subdivision, we're working with one note here. The first of which, if we're counting 1, E, and A, is just the 1. So it's quarter notes. We could think of it that way. And that sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, not too difficult. That's probably another one of the earlier things that you learn how to do as a drummer, is keeping time, not with an eighth note necessarily, but with a quarter note. That's another very common ostinato for the right hand to be playing. Next up, however, If you haven't already checked out my good friend Jaren's video, he talks about accent placement across 16th notes, and it's very useful for what we're about to get in, because now we're going to be placing a note on the E. So we're moving it from the first location to the second location of 16th notes. And again, this is still only one note. So we're going to be having to count to some pretty small levels of detail here in order for things to work. So this is our, I guess, second technical ostinato in the right hand. It's going to be one note on the E. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. It is so important that you count while you play, or at least that you can count while you play. That's going to be absolutely necessary for this first more complex, hey, we're actually working with a 16th note subdivision in our right hand. That's pretty tricky. So count it out, place that right hand on all of those E's, and you should be good to go. And again, you can use this on any beat in the funky primer. At this point, we've tripled the total number of beats, and it's just going to increase exponentially from there. Next up, we're going to place it on the third partial. So 1 E and. This is just the upbeat eighth note, which is a really popular thing to do. You hear it a lot in disco music, and it sounds just like this. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. So we're at our last of the 4 possible single note ostinatos in a grouping of 4 16th notes, and that's the 1 E and This one is another one of those tricky ones. These are 16th notes, and this is the last of the 4. It's not a quarter note. It's not just the upbeat eighth note, and it shares around the same amount of difficulty, I'd say, as the second placement or the second partial. The E, the is just about as hard. So make sure, again, that you're counting this out and give it some work. Here we go. This is what that sounds like. 1 E and a 2 E and a ready. Here we go. E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Cool. Now, if you've never even played 16th notes on top of the grooves in the funky primer, that's probably where this should have started off with, honestly, because that's going to be really crucial to helping you count out all of the other placements of these possible ostinato combinations. So we went from 0, we just went through all of the single note placements for 16th notes, and now we're just going to fill up all 4. So jumping to the end here, this is all 4 16th notes present, and we're playing just 4 16th notes per beat. It's a full beat of 16th notes in the right hand. That's going to be our ostinato now. So 1 E and a 2 E and a ready and a here we go. And 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. If you can do that, I'm confident that you can at least figure out all of the other combinations that we're going to be getting into here, because it's picking and choosing parts of that whole, right? Because we've got all 4 of these. We're choosing either individual ones, groups of 2, any of those placements. We're just taking from that whole, and we're counting those out in the right hand. So we've already done 0 notes. We've done the single notes per beat. Let's do the 2 notes per beat. 8th notes would be an example of this, and these ones are separated. They're just totally even. I'll put it that way. 1 and 2 and ready. Here we go. And 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And. Not a new ostinato by any means. Now let's flip that. Let's play on the E's and the U's. So 1 E and a, 2 E and a. We're going to play on the E's and the U's. Again, count this out. I'll show you what this sounds like. Here we go. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 1 E and a, 2 and a 3E and a 4E and a. Much trickier, but it shares the fact that these are still going to be perfectly even notes. It's as if we're just doing the eighth note, but on the E's and the U's instead of on the ones and the ands. Next up, we're going to do the same process that we did where we moved around the single note from 1, 2, 3, and 4 different positions. We're going to be doing that with two notes now. So first up is 1E and a. So we're going to be doing the first two notes in a beat. Again, count. Counting is your best friend in all of these. This is what that ostinato is going to sound like in the right hand. Here we go. 1E and a 2E and a ready and a play E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Cool. Let's move that. So instead of 1E, we're going to do E and. 1E and, 2E and, 3E and. This is one of my personal favorites in the two note grouping category. Here's what that sounds like. 1, 2, ready, and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Sweet. Next up, we're just going to keep scooting that over. We're still working on these permutations. There's another big word. The next one we're going to be doing is and a. So the third and the fourth partials of the grouping of 16th notes. Here's what that sounds like. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. So we've done 5 of the two note groupings so far. We have the eighth notes, we have the E's and the U's, we have the 1E, we have E and, we have and a, and last of the 6 possible locations, we're going to be doing 1 a. So 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a. Cool. That's all of the two note groupings, and that leads us to the 3 note groupings, which by and large I'd say are among the more popular alternate right-hand ostinatos that drummers often will pull from. Because in this one we have 1 and a, and we have 1E and. And if you turn to, I think it's page 44, the Funky Primer, looks like this. Looks like that, right there. The book actually gives you that material to work with. It'll give you the 1E and it'll give you the 1 and a. These are really popular because a grouping of 3 notes in the right hand as an ostinato is a lot of the time a lot more manageable than trying to play 16th notes the entire time, but it still gives the listener a lot of the same amount of note density. We're still filling up a lot of that 16th note subdivision for people to keep track of. We're filling that space as a drummer, but it's not as technically demanding as maybe playing all of those 4 16th notes would be in comparison. So, first off, we're going to be doing 1E and. Pretty simple. 1E and, 2E and, 3E and, 4E and. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a. Not too bad. Next up, let's do 1 and a. It's the other one that's present in the back of the book. You hear this a lot in samba. So if you want to start getting into some Brazilian studies or playing some Brazilian grooves like samba or bossa nova, this one is kind of your mainstay. It's very, very popular for those and a lot of other funk types of genres as well. So check it out. 1 and a. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4. Now the next 2 3-note groupings of 16th note ostinatos are not as prevalent, but I think they're really cool. So check it out. The next one we're going to do is E and So we're not going to be playing the downbeat of any of the beats that we're playing, but we're filling in the rest of those 3 notes. More on this tomorrow as we learn how to put our left foot in the place of that. I think it's super cool. Anyways, check it out. E and a. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a. Last of the 3-note groupings is 1 E This is in section 2 of the Funky Primer as one of the other rhythms that you learn in the beginning of the book. And it's probably the most difficult, in my opinion, among the 3-note groupings of 16th note ostinatos for the right hand to do. One of my personal favorite things to do with this one as well is to give the E just a little bit of an accent so you can try and throw off the listener a little bit if they're not paying attention too hard. And I'll demonstrate that here in a moment. That takes us through all 16 possible placements of 16th notes in one beat for our right hand to have a new ostinato to work with. I'm going to go ahead and play through all of them on top of beat number 2 in the Funky Primer section 3A, and that's just going to be 1 and 3 on the kick drum and 2 and 4 on the snare drum with the changing ostinato in the hi-hat. And you'll see how each ostinato has a little bit of a different feeling to it. And I think that's just one of the cooler things about studying these ostinatos is learning about how they influence the way that any particular groove can feel. It's really cool stuff. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright, so that is not easy to do. A lot of that was actually really, really sloppy. But it goes to show you there's a lot that can be practiced on any section of the Funky Primer while trying to keep these right-hand ostinatos there. The next thing I'm going to do is play a different groove than number 2 of section 3A. I'm going to play a groove that I'm not sure it's written exactly this way in the Funky Primer, or if it exists exactly like this in the Funky Primer, but it's a groove that places a couple of 16th notes on the bass drum, and I find that having some 16th notes that are contrary to the ostinato in the right hand proves to be, 1, really, really challenging at first, and 2, really, really cool sounding. So here's going to be a different groove. It's going to have a bass drum on the 1, the and of 2, and the E and the and of beat 3. So 1, 2, and 3, 1, and 2, and E and 4. 1, 2, and E and 4. It's going to sound like that. right, so that was pretty darn tricky. I do not recommend that you go through all of them on a particular beat. The better way to practice this, in my opinion, would be to choose one right-hand ostinato that you're a fan of, and then take that through a good chunk of the funky primer so that you can practice having that ostinato line up with the backbeat on the snare drum and a changing bass drum part. Again, the more common ostinatos that are going to actually happen in music way more are the quarter note, the eighth note, the 16th notes, the 1 and the 1 E and. I would take those 5, go through a good chunk of the book, and then start working on some more of the unique right-hand ostinatos that are going to be a little bit more difficult and are going to require more of that accurate subdividing of that 16th note pulse in order to place the ostinato in a healthy place while maintaining your groove and just keeping good time overall. Please feel free to leave any questions you might have in the comments if there's anything I can clarify a little bit better. Most of the demos that I did during this were not at a very slow tempo, so make sure you're practicing these at as slow as you need in order to get them accurate first. Don't take them as fast as I did in this video. I've been practicing them for a while, and a lot of them I kind of have been practicing for this video and for that purpose. So take it slow, take it as open as you need it to be in order for those right-hand ostinatos to be accurate, and experiment putting them on different places on the kit. Again, this doesn't have to be a hi-hat thing. This could be a ride cymbal thing. Anywhere that you like to keep time, any of these ostinatos in the right hand is totally fair game. Also, if you're feeling adventurous, add some ghost notes. Improvise some extra notes on the bass drum. Do whatever you want to do, but the purpose of this lesson was to give you some more ostinato vocabulary that you may have not considered to use across your timekeeping device of choice on the drum set. So hopefully this opens up a lot of creative opportunities for you, and it hopefully also gives you a lot of content and material to be practicing during these times where we all know we can be practicing a little bit more. So I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Stay tuned until tomorrow, where we start adding the left foot on the hi-hat as another timekeeping ostinato tool, and we learn some variations on that and how they can interact with the ostinatos that we're doing with the right hand. So until then, take care and keep on practicing.